A journalist thought he was setting a trap for Trump, but in reality, he was ending his own career. Within minutes, millions of people would witness one of the biggest media collapses in history. By the way, I see that you still haven't subscribed. That makes me a little sad. If faith, family, and true values matter to you, subscribe now, and don't miss the rest of this story. The studio lights were perfectly set. Cameras were rolling. The production team was anxiously waiting backstage while the host reviewed his notes one last time. Tonight was his night. His plan was simple. He would ask Trump personal questions in front of millions, catch him off guard, and make media history. Every second of this interview would be a turning point in his career. But there was one thing he hadn't accounted for. The man sitting across from him had seen this game played countless times before, and Trump never lost at his own game. The host adjusted his microphone with a smile, nodding with fake sincerity. "Mr. Trump," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Of course, we'll discuss your accomplishments." Then he paused. With flawless timing, he dropped his venomous question. "But there's something people have been wondering about." The room fell silent. Other than the low hum of the monitors, not a sound could be heard. Then the host completed his sentence. "With all your power, all your wealth, why are you still married to the same woman?" The air shifted instantly. The attack had begun. Trump tilted his head slightly. Not a hint of surprise crossed his face. He had faced these kinds of attacks more times than he could count. But tonight, he wasn't just defending himself. He was standing up for every marriage, every real relationship, and the host had no idea. The studio went silent. The question was a perfectly laid trap. The host was certain he was about to humiliate Trump in front of millions. But he had underestimated him. Trump leaned slightly forward in his chair, locking eyes with the host. His smile said he understood the game, but he was about to change the rules. "You know," he said, his voice calm but sharp, "this is exactly what the media doesn't understand. They don't value loyalty. They only understand temporary relationships. But real values don't work that way." The host hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by the unexpected resistance. He had expected Trump to get angry, to get defensive. But the opposite had happened. "I didn't just choose a wife," Trump continued. "I chose a life partner." Tension filled the room. The host could feel the conversation slipping away from him, so he quickly launched another attack. "Mr. Trump," he said, placing a fake look of surprise on his face. "But many people question why Melania is with you. Is her greatest achievement simply being your wife?" In an instant, the atmosphere in the studio changed. The question wasn't just an attack on Trump. It was an insult to Melania. Trump leaned back in his chair. He let the silence linger for a moment. Then, with a single sentence, he flipped the entire situation. Trump narrowed his eyes and paused. This was the moment the entire country was holding its breath for. "That's not just an insult to Melania," he said, his voice sharp and unwavering. "That's an insult to all women." A murmur spread through the audience. The host had no idea what he had just walked into. "Melania speaks 5 languages," Trump continued. "She has had a successful career. She has represented our country all over the world. But you see her greatest achievement as marrying Mr. Trump." The host's smile froze. The trap he had carefully set had just backfired. Trump slowly leaned back, clasping his fingers together on the table. His gaze carried the confidence of a chess master who had already figured out his opponent's every move. Real success is about who stands by your side when the cameras are off." Silence. No one in the studio moved. A few people looked as if they had forgotten to breathe. Trump was no longer just speaking to the host. He was addressing the millions watching at home. As a representative of the media, you can't understand real relationships, because in your world, loyalty, love, and commitment are nothing more than headlines. The host opened his mouth to speak, but Trump raised a hand, cutting him off. "But in real life," Trump said, his voice now even stronger, "loyalty is not for sale." The host glanced down at his cards. Nothing was going according to plan. Trump had taken control, and the audience could feel it. But he wasn't the type to give up. He decided to make one last move. "All right, Mr. Trump," he said, his voice sharper now. "But people still wonder, do you think Melania has to live in your shadow?" The atmosphere in the room shifted. This was a calculated attack. Trump tilted his head slightly, locking eyes with the host. Like a chess master, he was waiting for the perfect counter-move. "A shadow?" he repeated, his tone carrying a hint of amusement. "Do you only see strong women as those who are loud, constantly in the spotlight? True strength isn't just about being seen. It's about knowing when to silence the world." The host hesitated for a moment. He had expected Trump to get defensive, maybe even angry. Instead, he was calm and completely in control. "You say Melania lives in my shadow?" Trump leaned back in his chair. "I think you're confusing shadows with spotlights." A faint applause rose from the audience. The host tried to regain control of the conversation, but the momentum was no longer in his favor. He had attempted to paint Melania as someone overshadowed by Trump, but Trump had skillfully turned the narrative around. Still, the host wasn't ready to give up. "Then tell me, Mr. Trump," he said, his voice sharpening again, "is Melania truly free? Or do you think your dominant personality influences her decisions?" This was a new angle. It didn't just question Melania's achievements. It questioned Trump's role in their marriage. Trump leaned back. The game was entirely in his hands now. "Melania is a woman who chooses her own path," he said firmly. "Her silence does not mean she has no voice. Power is not about who speaks the loudest. True power is being the one people listen to when you do speak." A strong wave of applause erupted. The host struggled to regain control, but the balance had already shifted. He could feel it slipping through his fingers. So he decided to go for a more direct attack. "But Mr. Trump," he said, feigning curiosity, "people expected a man as powerful as you to have a more assertive wife. Someone more visible, more vocal, more active in the public eye." Trump shook his head. This was turning into a ridiculous debate. "The media defines a strong woman as someone who yells the loudest," Trump said. "But real strength is knowing when to stay silent and when to speak." The audience murmured in agreement. The host tried to jump in, but Trump continued. "Melania is not a shadow. She is a light, but not the kind of light you want to see." A few seconds of silence filled the studio. The host held his breath, but he had yet to make his biggest mistake. The host had tried to imply that Melania wasn't a strong woman, but Trump had already figured out the game. "All right, Mr. Trump," the host said, "is Melania truly able to live her own life, or is she always in your shadow?" It was his last desperate move. Trump leaned forward slightly. His reaction wasn't what the host expected. "You keep talking about shadows," Trump said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "But Melania and I walk side by side. You don't understand her strength because you're trying to fit her into the model you want to see." Applause broke out in the audience. The host glanced down at his cue cards, but the words now felt meaningless. Nothing was going according to plan. And yet, he was about to make one more mistake. The host had tried to portray Melania's quiet nature as weakness, but Trump had turned the attack back on him, winning the audience over. Still, the host refused to give up. "Then tell me, Mr. Trump," he said, his voice hardening, "many people expected a man as powerful as you to have a more influential wife, someone more visible, more outspoken, more active. Have you ever wondered why Melania always stays in the background?" The tension in the studio escalated. The host was no longer questioning Trump's marriage. He was attacking his wife's character. Trump slowly leaned back, interlocking his fingers. His gaze held the cold calculation of a strategist who had already spotted his opponent's weakness. "Look," he said, his voice now firm and authoritative. "You're describing the kind of woman the media wants to see, but I'm talking about a real woman." The host opened his mouth to respond, but Trump wasn't finished. "Melania isn't in the background. Melania knows exactly where she wants to stand." The applause grew louder. "Today, women are told that to be strong, they must always be loud, always be seen, always prove themselves. But real strength doesn't come from constantly being in the spotlight. Strength is knowing when to speak, and when you do, making the world listen." The host held his breath. His entire plan was crumbling. But his biggest mistake was still ahead. Desperate for a way out, he reached for his final card. And in that moment, he made the biggest mistake of his career. "Tell me, Mr. Trump," he said, forcing fake curiosity into his voice, "have you ever thought about choosing a better wife?" The studio went silent. Trump's expression changed. The air in the room grew heavy. A few audience members shifted in their seats, but no one dared to breathe. For a moment, Trump said nothing. Then he slowly leaned forward, his expression now unreadable. "A better wife?" he repeated, his voice cutting through the silence like ice. "Melania is my life partner. I love her, not for her beauty, but for the strength she gives me every single day. You will never understand real value." Trump turned his eyes to the camera. He was no longer just speaking to the host. He was speaking to the millions watching at home. Real value is not replaceable. Real loyalty is not negotiable. Real love cannot be bought. A thunderous applause erupted. The host was speechless. The production team finally managed to cut to a commercial break, but the damage had already been done. Within hours, clips of the interview flooded social media. Trump's words about family and loyalty were shared by millions. Even critics had to admit it was a masterful response in the face of a hostile media. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. And remember, real relationships aren't about rising alone. They're about standing tall together. We are stronger together. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Until next time.